Hello everyone, this video is the first video in a hopefully very long line of Disney literary discussions where I discuss either a Disney movie in its entirety or a particular character and dissect it like I do if I was in an English class discussing a book. From the beginning, I knew I wanted to start with Judge Claude Frollo from the Hunchback of Notre Dame. His character is a bit different from the book, but I find that the Disney version is chock full of depth that's unlike what you see in Disney history before, especially now. Shade. There's so much to unpack that we have to start from the very beginning of the Hunchback of Notre Dame. We're introduced to Frollo and Quasimodo in the introductory song The Bells of Notre Dame, narrated by the wonderful, so adorable, Clopin. Not too far into the song do we learn about Frollo's character. Frollo wants to purge the world of vice and sin, and he saw corruption everywhere except within. This is the not so subtle hint to the viewers that Frollo is not a decent religious man, and when he accuses Quasi's mother of theft on the basis of her ethnicity, she runs, he pursues, and kills her by grabbing her stolen goods, making her trip down the stairs of the church and hitting her head, ending up killing her. This is important because the saints, Jesus and Mary, watch as he calls Quasi a monster and almost drowns him until the archdeacon stops him. And you say, how does an archdeacon stop Frollo from killing another innocent? The archdeacon knows that the only way to stop Frollo is by pure religious guilt and shame, and in this instance is completely justified since he just killed a woman and was about to drown a baby in a well. The archdeacon knows Frollo and his corruption, but he also knows his weaknesses, religious guilt, and his so-called piety. Frollo truly believes in this moment that his actions are just, righteous, untouchable, until the archdeacon says, quote, "You can lie to yourself and your minions. You can claim that you haven't a qualm, but you can never hide what you've done from the very eyes of Notre Dame." The upcoming shots are some of the most spectacular shots I've ever seen in Disney history. The realization on Frollo's face as the scene switches to multiple saints, Jesus and Mother Mary, with eyes seeped in judgment, as Clopin sings, and for the first time in his life of power and control, Frollo felt a twinge for his immortal soul. Frollo's face is full of utter, deep fear because his saints, his mother, his God, has witnessed his sins, and the deadliest of all sins, one of the deadliest of all sins, is murder. And he killed Quasi's mother, and he was about to kill Quasi himself, for which he did with complete ease because he thought that he was justified. Now he must repent, and he takes Quasimodo into his care, but it's not just because he cares about his immortal soul, and he definitely doesn't care about the baby. Frollo is selfish, of course, and even says that, quote, "Even this foul creature may yet prove to be of use to me." He sees Quasi as a hassle, but necessary, which opens the door to abuse and cruelty. To keep Quasimodo under his control, Frollo restricts Quasi from doing normal everyday things like going outside and speaking to people. His reason for this is because Quasi would be ridiculed for the way he looks. Frollo says this as he ridicules his looks and capabilities. Frollo also blames Quasi for everything. He must wait on Frollo like a slave, he must call him master, a subtle hint that Frollo demands that he's always in control because he feels superior, especially to people he does not see as human. Frollo belittles, lies, shames, and guilts Quasi into being devoted to him, telling Quasi that he's his only friend and that, wait for it, his mother abandoned him. And that Frollo happily took Quasi in. Of course, the viewer knows otherwise. We saw Frollo kill his mother and nearly drown Quasi, but Frollo's web of lies, manipulation, and deceit are so ingrained in Quasi and himself even, because only the Archdeacon knows the truth. And what better way to control Quasi than to pretend like he's cared for willingly by a man that chose to bring him up despite his appearance. This is a strong bond for Quasimodo. He believes that Frollo is the only one that cares, so he doesn't rebel until he meets someone who is truly kind, forgiving, respectful, and not abusive, Esmeralda. Esmeralda changes everything for not just Quasi, who falls in love with her, but for Frollo, who lusts after her. This is a dichotomy that we see throughout the movie the moment that we meet Esmeralda on stage. Frollo, Quasi, and the audience meet her at the topsy-turvy celebration in Paris. The instant Frollo sees her dancing, he finds it both mesmerizing and disgusting, but he keeps watching, intrigued. Only when she defies him, something no one has done, and a woman to boot, does his intrigue turn into a lust-filled obsession, and then violence, viciousness, for the rest of the movie, centered around him and his obsession and need to control and own Esmeralda. But why does he do this? At the time, women were seen as either a mother or a whore. They strive to be like Mary. Women must be soft, meek, quiet, and submissive, something Esmeralda is not. This both enrages and interests Frollo. He's, should we say correctly, triggered by her beauty, smarts, and wit. That doesn't align with anything he believes in. Quite the opposite. His intrigue becomes obsession to own her, to teach her, to obey her as a good Christian woman would be, so he can have her tamed and have her as his own beside her as he runs and rules Paris, and get rid of her people as well. But, of course, Esmeralda wants nothing to do with him because she sees his greed, violent tendencies, hypocrisy, and his budding hatred-fueled obsession over her and Quasi when she stands up for Quasi against Frollo, as he ignores Quasi's pleas for his master to help him as the crowd turns violent against him because of his looks. Frollo wants to teach Quasi a lesson in religious obedience, but Esmeralda sees it as outright cruelty. Without hesitation, she defies him, which takes courage not just because Frollo is already enraged, but because he's the justice minister who's been trying to wipe out her people for 20 years. Before a crowd of hundreds, she cuts Quasi free, embarrassing Frollo and undermining his power and religious authority. Now things shift in Frollo. A woman has defied him to save his ward that he's abused all his life, showing Quasi that there's others out there that can treat him with respect no matter what he looks like. And Frollo's violent obsession toward Esmeralda begins at this moment. To rectify the scene during this celebration and his growing feelings for Esmeralda, he labels her as a sinful witch. Now she's not even a woman, but she's a thing to him. This is escalated as he feels it right to grab her in church after she has cried sanctuary, threaten her life while sniffing her hair. How pleasant. But the Archdeacon can see the violence bubbling inside Frollo and reminds him that the church is watching him, reminding Frollo and the audience of his sin. That doesn't last long because Frollo blames Esmeralda, not himself, for his lust towards her, for his lustful thoughts towards her. It's not his fault. It's never Frollo's fault. It's not his fault he sniffs her hair. It's not his fault he sneaks up behind her and grabs her. It's not his fault that he must threaten her, nor his feelings for her. It's always her fault. And this is justified in Frollo's beliefs. He blames everyone for his vices, never including himself, because as the minister of justice is untouchable, showing us that he's full of sin, pride, greed, and anger, but because of his religious, authoritative ego, he sees himself as just and holy in everything, and everyone else is to blame and is full of sin. This is a nod to religious authoritative leaders in the church and politicians who are unjust, abusive, and corrupt, though they never see themselves that way. The best song, in my humble opinion, is In Heaven's Light, Hellfire. The dichotomy of this song is obvious even in the title. Quasi sees Esmeralda as heavenly and even calls her an angel, while Frollo sees her as the epitome of sin and hell. While Quasi's song is soft and loving with a happy melody, Hellfire is introduced by chanting monks that becomes darker and darker until we see Frollo standing in front of a fireplace meant to symbolize hell. Frollo's song is about control, power, lust, shame, and violence. First, he states in Hellfire, quote, "You know I am a righteous man, of my virtue I am justly proud. You know I'm so much stronger than the common, weak, licentious crowd." He's better than all of them and always will be, but now he's obsessed with a human woman who doesn't like him, who doesn't obey, and that means it's his duty to teach her to obey. Quote, "Tell me, Maria, why I see her dancing there, why her smoldering eyes scorch my soul," and continues in another line, "Like fire, hellfire, this burning in my skin, this burning desire is turning me to sin. It's not my fault, I'm not to blame, it is the gypsy girl, the witch, who sent this flame." Here he begins to cast his lust onto Esmeralda and the audience, saying it's in God's plan, it must be, and that Satan is, quote, "so much stronger than a man." It's Esmeralda's fault, it's God's fault, it's Satan's fault for these feelings, but it's never his. This is significant that he's begging for Mary's help because she is the quintessential Christian epitome of what a woman should be and what men were supposed to want in a woman. But that's not Esmeralda, and that's not what Frollo wants either. So his guilt and shame takes on a new level with the lines, quote, "Protect me, Maria, don't let this siren cast her spell. Don't let her fire shear my flesh and bones. Destroy Esmeralda and let her taste the fires of hell, or else let me be mine and mine alone." Frollo is begging Mary to save him, to help him, to stop this lust for Esmeralda, and in return, he promises, in his weird way, he will teach Esmeralda to obey and own her, so Frollo will be saved, and he can have her seen in the lyrics, quote, "Hellfire, dark fire, now gypsy, it's your turn. Choose me or your prior, be mine or you will burn." As he sings this threat, and actually throughout the rest of the song, he's holding her scarf she gave him during the festival, rubbing it against his face and sniffing it. But when he states that she must choose him or the fire, he throws the scarf into the fire pit as the dark figures in the background surround him. His final act of requiem is when he bows to his knees and says, "God have mercy on her, God have mercy on me, but she will be mine or she will burn." If he can't control her or own her or love her, then she's sin incarnate, and he will do the honor in burning her to death to rid herself of her own sin and Frollo's sin. Frollo keeps his word about finding Esmeralda no matter what it takes. He orders the army to find her alive, and in his quest to find and own her, he destroys property, burns down half of Paris, and kills thousands. In his search, Frollo demands that Phoebus burn a family alive when they defy him, nearly killing them, and he, in turn, when Phoebus says that he will not kill these innocent people, Frollo almost gets Phoebus killed, showing us that his obsession, already disgusting, has turned into more than that. It's blind abuse of power and hatred, but he isn't stopped by the masses because they already fear him, because he has been in control for 20 years. He's allowed to abuse his position of authority to seek out Esmeralda and to punish her for her defiance and his lust for her. That's her fault. And part of the reason why Paris is full of sin, even though the true sinner is Frollo. As Frollo gets closer to finding Esmeralda, he realizes that Quasi is his key in finding her and becomes enraged that Esmeralda chose Quasi over him. He already believes that Quasi is useless, but now Frollo becomes jealous, unwilling to accept and see why Esmeralda cares about Quasimodo and not him. He truly doesn't think that he's abusive and corrupt, which is the most dangerous kind of person to be around. Frollo begins his deceit to extract information from Quasi by visiting Quasi with a treat and prods him for questions about her. But then at a glance he sees a statue Quasi has carved out of wood of Esmeralda and goes into a fit of rage, blaming Quasi for Paris burning because he trusted a witch. He became friends with a sinner. He fell in love with her, a siren. In his rage, Frollo states that he will rid Paris of her and her sin because Esmeralda is the reason Quasi has strayed off the path God gave him, and her hold is unbreakable unless she is killed. But he's not truly speaking about Quasimodo. He's speaking about himself and projecting onto Quasi because Frollo knows he's an easy target to place the blame on. He's been doing it to Quasi since the day he nearly drowned him. This is obvious gaslighting, but compared to Esmeralda, even Phoebus, who sees right through Frollo's abuse, Quasi grew up with it and can't see it in its entirety. When Frollo speaks, he projects his issues onto other people, releasing the blame from him and then onto others, where he can then punish with ease because his religious and political authority have never been questioned in his 20 years as the Minister of Justice. We see Frollo's manipulation at its finest when he tells Quasi he's coming for her and her people, that he knows where she is. But he doesn't actually know where she is until Frollo and his men follow Quasi and Phoebus to the Court of Miracles and captures them all. Esmeralda is to be sentenced to burn at the stake as befitting the crime of witchcraft, and what Frollo promised he'd do if she doesn't choose him. He tells her that she'll be saved if she chooses to be with him, and she spits in his face in reply. As promised, he declares that she must burn for her sins, but what he really means is Frollo is burning her to save his soul and rid him of his obsession he can't seem to control when she's around, hoping that will solve his inner turmoil. And it's his duty to send this demon back to where she belongs. He also wants to kill her because she threatens his religious beliefs and power over himself and Paris, because he must kill the sinner that's supposedly making him sin, and he can't live with the knowledge that she has bested him. This is what makes Frollo so terribly real. He rather see innocent people die than admit his behavior, beliefs, and abuse is wrong. When Quasi once again defies Frollo and saves Esmeralda, Frollo's rage becomes homicidal, finally broken as he sees that the people around him no longer see him as just and see him for who he actually is. In a symbolic breakdown for Frollo, the archdeacon that stopped him from killing Quasi as a baby is pushed aside and locked out, so he can't go after Frollo as he is going up to Quasi's room. This signifies that even religious guilt and shame have no hold on Frollo anymore. Now he just wants revenge. Frollo pretends to comfort Quasi as he comes up the stairs, trying to manipulate him again, stating that it was only his duty to kill her, and that it's his duty to kill Quasi too. Frollo almost stabs Quasi, but is overcome by him, who correctly states that Frollo is what's wrong with the world, which has been the message since the first song. Now it's good versus evil, as with all showdowns, and not just in Disney, when it's revealed who is the monster and who is the man. Quasi and Frollo fight while Quasi holds Esmeralda in his arms, trying to protect her. The significance here is indirect but clear. Frollo is facing off against the two most righteous people in Paris, the two people brave enough to defy Frollo and question him and his power. In Frollo's rage, he tells Quasi that he killed his mother, his pride overcoming him as he raises his sword to kill a huddled Quasi, stating that he will, quote, defeat the wicked, but the gargoyle that he's standing on cracks, and Frollo, the wicked, cruel, abusive tyrant of Paris, looks down and sees his punishment, hellfire. The city he burned to find Esmeralda swallows him, and into its hellfire, the symbolism obvious. Judge Claude Frollo falls into hell, not Esmeralda, not Quasimodo. Frollo was steeped in sin and was the bane of Paris and its people, not people like Quasimodo or Esmeralda. In gorgeous, terrifying imagery of Frollo's demise, he falls backwards into Paris's fire, the flames licking at him, welcoming him into hell. He screams in shock, even when he never showed mercy for the people he's tortured, abused, manipulated, killed, and gaslighted under his terrifying reign. But if there's any doubt that Quasi wasn't pure or an innocent, we see Quasi's face as Frollo falls, and his face is in shock and dismay, even after everything Frollo's done. The music that accompanies Frollo's death is similar to the music in Hellfire, which shows us that he undoubtedly falls into hell where he belongs. Esmeralda and Quasi didn't bring sin, vice, and wickedness to Paris. Frollo did. And where does Frollo die? At the hands of Notre Dame itself. The Archdeacon told Frollo that Notre Dame has eyes, and his punishment for trying to kill Quasi yet again was death by Notre Dame's own stone, as the gargoyle came to life and broke in half, sending him into his own hellfire, looking like a manic demon as he fell. Frollo is the best and the worst Disney villain in Disney history, because no matter the time period, there are men that still believe exactly what Frollo believed in. This isn't a made-up monster. This is real-life issues, a real-life person that still goes on within the church and religion in general. Murder, abuse, manipulation are all just because God told them so. He's a man like any other man, not a mythical being, and that's why he's so terrifying. And that is why he is the best and the worst Disney villain, and this movie is the best Disney movie of all time. Thank you so much for watching. Please give us a like, subscribe, a comment with your thoughts, because I really want to know what you thought. And please share if you love Disney or you love this new series of Disney literary discussions made by moi. And if you want to get to know me, all of my social media and my writing is in the description box below. Thank you so much and have a great Disney day. Bye!